Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Part 3 of our Behaviorally Smart Team Performance webinar series, Part 3 of 4. Today we will be, as always, recording this session, so a final copy will be provided to everybody in attendance, plus those who have registered along the way. We'll also do a quick refresher of some main points so far, just as a refresher, plus a few new folks that have come along that may not have had a chance to review the previous recordings that are posted on our webinar site. That being said, if there are any questions along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A chat box to post any questions, and I'll get to those as best I can and share them with the team as they seem fit. And then, without any further, and everybody will be on mute accordingly, so that we don't have a lot of cross chatter, and that's the other use for that question box. We will be peppering the presentation with poll questions, keep everybody up to speed and attentive, so that we're all on the same page and we're all getting the best information we can as we move forward. So without further ado, so I'm Trip Rockwell. I'm their Chief Marketing Officer here at DNA Behavior, and I'm accompanied by Leanne Morales, who will be our Master of Ceremonies today, delivering the presentation moving forward. So with that, great. Let's get started.
Thank you, Trip. I appreciate it. And Trip and I have been leading this. This is the third part of the four-part series. Our focus today really is around the norming and the performing of a team. We'll do a little bit of a review just so everybody's aware of, if you're a newcomer, sort of the attributes of the program, because I think that's always important. It just reinforces the knowledge as well. So as Trip mentioned, I'm Leanne Morales. I actually lead the Chief Relationship position here at DNA Behavior, and we work with companies around the world. It's quite fascinating to be able to do this, but it's universal in its application of business DNA. With financial firms, we have a number of, probably 60% of our business here at DNA Behavior is related to financial services. The other portion of it really is around business DNA or organizations in HR tech and business DNA consulting. There's a number of applications for it. So as Trip mentioned, that if you have a question throughout this presentation, please add it into the chat box. He monitors that throughout this webinar. And we really try to make it, and if it's something that's applicable for the rest of the group, Trip will bring that up. And he also will add a few poll questions through this presentation. It just keeps us, sort of changes the energy a little bit, but also keeps it relevant to what we're talking about, sort of reinforces the knowledge. And then you will receive a copy of the PDF report after the webinar, and then a call recording. We actually record this. It shows up on our webinar channel. So you're welcome to listen to it at any time. And then we'll also share with you our podcast channel. Hugh Massey and I have been leading a podcast series called Behaviorally Smart Leadership. So you can access that as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I did also want to draw your attention. You'll see there's a PDF download, a handbook of an unlocking guide. And in that unlocking guide, some powerful information that's really complementary, and even if you don't use business DNA natural behaviors, some great insights to be able to use that document. And it'll probably make sense as we go through this presentation, the application of that. So the company, DNA Behavior, is really around human capital management. We work with a number of sales teams for sales transformation, performance consulting or coaching, but it's really around managing the capital investment of your organization. It's quite interesting, and we will get pretty deep around the behavioral insights that business DNA will show you. The webinar today is the series 3 of 4, and we've covered, in the first webinar, we really covered around the whole framework around business DNA with the 4 phases of teams. And we the second webinar, we really went into more depth around the forming and the storming phase of a team, and then just touched on the last 2 parts, which is norming and performing. But for today, we're really going to talk more about that norming and the performing and give you a couple of case studies that we've included. But really, the 6 points here that we're covering today are really around understanding behavior, how communication and learning styles are really imperative to actually getting a team to perform. And then one thing that we always advocate, and number 2, is the self-awareness piece. I've seen so many times where leaders think that it's their team that's really not performing, but in many cases it's just maybe the lack of direction that they're getting from the leader. And you can really untap a lot of that in that whole self-awareness understanding of how you're wired and how you actually communicate. Number 3, becoming a leader using adaption. We work on that quite a bit, and sometimes we're wired where we really have a more difficult time with adaption, but we can talk a little bit about that. And then number 4, leveraging the team differences for better results. Number 5, obviously we're all in business to deliver a good client experience, and you can increase revenue through that team cohesiveness. And then number 6 is actually the review of the norming and the performing phases of the case studies. So we've got a pretty action-packed webinar today. We'll try to keep it to about 50 minutes and try to sort of finish up about 5 to the hour. But if you do have questions, please keep them interactive. We try to make sure that it's relevant. And then if you have any questions, certainly we're available to take a call with you if you have any or things that you'd like us to cover on the final webinar, which would be about 30 days from now. So we've talked in the webinars a lot about the 70% team productivity gains, and I always am, it's always interesting when individuals will say, is it really possible to get a 70% gain? And it really, if you think about it, if you've ever worked on a team where you've had high performance, everything sort of clicked, team gelled, had great client experiences, that's a team that really did achieve that 70% productivity gain. Technology worked, everything seemed to really work well. Could have been a small team, could have been a large team. And it really gets around that operational competency, team results, the leadership team, but it's all predicated on trust and team values. And I've actually worked in, if you've worked on a large project where you might have one member that just is very different than everybody else, but they perform. That's great. They've obviously figured out how to work with those behavioral insights. And then you probably worked with teams where there's somebody that really is an outlier and never fits into the team. There are certain things that you can do to sort of get that team cohesiveness, but it really does speak to the team trust is really what is built on achieving that 70% productivity gain. And that is a 2009 Gallup research. So it is an external research validation, but I've actually worked on teams that did achieve those 70% gains, and it's really around being behaviorally smart. And then this is, again, a review slide, but 87% of measurable business results or business obstacles are communication related. And again, if you sort of point to a project or a team that you worked on that didn't work so well, you could probably point to either somebody didn't understand the guidance or didn't understand what was expected of them, or something got missed, and it was really related to communication. And I always think it's interesting because people say, I do communicate, and that's probably true, but we all have very different ways of communicating. And it sort of starts at the core of really understanding if somebody is more high level or needs more detail, somebody that really likes to engage more energetically with graphics, maybe verbally, versus somebody that needs a lot more information. So there's very interesting ways to get at the root of how people need to be communicated with and for better throughput for the team. But that Harvard study back in 2002 really points to those 87% of communication issues. And if you've ever worked on a technology project, a lot of times I've always said this, that about 70% of them do fail, and it's not because of the technology, it's really around how people work together and their understood sort of role on the team. So it's very important in that team cohesiveness to build trust and then sort of an open, transparent way to work together. And the way we do it here at DNA Behavior, we the starting line is what we call natural behavior. And it's business DNA natural behavior. It's a great predictor of somebody's ability to perform in certain roles. So this iceberg slide sort of depicts what we call natural behavior. And in our world of natural behavior, business DNA, it's a 46-question discovery, and it's a four-choice model. It actually measures someone's innate talents and sort of the way that they're wired. It's sort of that natural talent. And they all can be, no two people will ever be the same, which is quite interesting. But the way we actually teach it is around a 10 profile sort of wheel, and we'll cover that a little bit later. But the things we cover that are covered in natural behavior can be automatic decision-making biases, communication patterns, learning styles, the talents, how you make decisions or your risk tolerance, and your propensity for leadership. Doesn't mean that any of the 10 profiles can't be leaders, because anybody can be, but it's learning how to adapt this, what we call level 2 behaviors, which are observable above the iceberg slide or above the waterline. These things that we learn in our experiences, in our education, societal norms, but the things that are actually below the surface are that natural instinctive talents. And sometimes they're referred to as blind spots. We don't even know it necessarily. It's just so automatic. And that's what we measure in that forced choice model called natural behavior. And with that, I think we have a poll question that's going to show up on the screen.
All right, as we work through the reference material from previous presentations, just a refresher question then. So what percentage of measurable business issues are communication related? So we've probably seen this before, but it's a good review as we move forward into the newer material coming up. And we'll just do a quick cross-section of those on board. And the numbers are coming in pretty even, so I'll just go ahead and share those. And half of you are really close, and half of you are really on top of it. So that's not too bad. But 87% based on that previous slide.
Just so you know, even if you do say it's 70%, because I mentioned that 70% of projects do fail, that it's still very high. I think people would agree that it's extremely high on that communication differences, can lead to business results that don't achieve their goals. So, and then just talking about the natural behavior discovery around that process to understand everybody's unique styles and talents. That's real, and we're going to show a slide going forward around how those, if you've got a larger team, how each one of those profile types work in the overall team. So this is a slide of the 10 profiles that I mentioned. The unique styles of the 10, we call that natural behavior, and it's business DNA is sort of the reporting that's a deliverable after you've completed the 46 questions. And you can see here there's 10 profile types, starting with the influencer here and the adapter here. So if you think about people that you've worked with, or even yourself, if you sort of wake up thinking about what you need to get done for the day, have a task list, have sort of some mental note of what you need to get done, more results. This is what we call a results-oriented profile type, and it really starts with that influencer on the left side down to the adapter. And the intensity can be different for every single person, but generally at the top of this wheel are people that are very fast-paced, and then at the bottom are people that really move more carefully, probably study things before they take action. They don't necessarily just make a decision quickly. They need more information. And then over on the right side here, it's starting with this influencer all the way down to adapter, are the more relational profiles of somebody that actually thinks about people and how they're going to interact with people to get results. So the left side would be more results focused and probably through people, and on the right side would be more people getting results. And they really coexist in the world, especially when you have teams. And I'll use an example here. Tripp and I are both initiators, and if we actually were working together every day on projects, and we do work pretty closely together, but if we work sort of side by side every day, you would see that we probably would be lacking that warmth, and that, especially if you're working with clients, it takes a little bit more of our learned behaviors to sort of connect with people, because we're sort of heads down getting our things done. Versus if we work with one of our team members here that's a facilitator, and we do work pretty closely with her, she tends to think about the relational piece of the work. And she's a great consultant because she actually makes people feel very comfortable, ask questions, and then she gets to the results. So you can see that we probably have the same goal, but we approach it very differently. And I know I've had a lot of information on that slide, but we're going to cover those 10 profiles in a little bit later slide deck that's in here, just to reinforce the importance of these profiles. And in that unlocking guide that I had shared with you, it's a download, all 10 profiles are listed there. And if you haven't taken natural behavior, it's probably a good idea just to understand the different profile types. But if you have completed your own, just to understand where you are compared to everybody else. It's pretty fascinating. And I'd say that's the one tool we have, that unlocking guide, that really helps teams sort of understand the behavioral differences that they have. And then this slide here, we talk about in the million profiles that have been completed for financial DNA and business DNA, it's the same assessment called natural behavior. It gives you the distribution of all of the profile types. It's quite interesting. 15% of our profile completions are community builders. And I mentioned that Tripp and I are both initiators. That makes up 12%. So the groups that actually have the least are the facilitators, because we have a team member in our group, and the relationship builders. They only have 4 and 5%. So you can see here the distribution is pretty interesting. And it just shows that we're all sort of uniquely wired. And even underneath these 15% of the community builders and the 5% relationship builders, each one of those people are going to be wired very differently as well. So what do we do with that information of the 10 profiles, and how does that really relate to the team structure around performing? So those of you that are familiar with Bruce Tuchman's work on team performance, it's one of my favorites because it really breaks it down. When teams come together, it could be a new team, it could be an existing team that you have a new person coming on board. That's the forming stage. It literally is where you are learning the behavioral insights of the team and learning how to work together. It's almost like starting to crawl before you run. The storming is the phase of a team where all the people are working together. And if you've ever been in a new team, people aren't sure exactly how to work together. There may be confusion about sort of what the deliverables are or the goals are. And that's what we call storming. And sometimes there can be conflict. A lot of times there is. It can be healthy conflict, or it can be dysfunctional conflict in that they don't really move through it quickly and they stay in storming. And believe it or not, there are teams that have been together for a long time, and I'm talking 20, 30 years, if that's possible, that never get out of storming. They have no real understanding of how to get out of that storming phase. It can be very dysfunctional, and I see that common. Most of the time, it's sort of diffused by adding another team member that can help with the storming, getting it out of storming, but sometimes they just stay in storming. A great place to be is what we call the norming phase, and we're going to cover that in detail. Norming is where you've actually put the team together, you really understand how each other works together. You've gone through that storming phase. Now you've reached a point where people really have mutual respect. There's trust. There's understanding of how to be comfortable to ask if you don't understand. So whether it's the leader or somebody that works in the team, but there's always team transparency that's working pretty well. And then the difference between the performing stage and the norming stage is when you truly have a high-performing team where everybody really understands the common goal of what's trying to get done. You might be able to discuss, debate, potentially have healthy conflict about a decision, but you actually move through it. And if you've set timelines, everything is met on time, on budget, and you have a high team performance, and everybody feels good about being part of that team. And if you've ever worked on a team that's been a high-performing team, you know what that looks like. But I do think if you sort of at that norming stage, that's perfectly okay, because it does mean that you still have the ability to grow and develop, and that's really a leadership development sort of part of the team. But it's being in the norming phase is certainly good, but you get the 70% of the productivity goals when you go into the performing stage. We're going to cover those in a little more detail about how to identify those, but I just wanted you to understand the 4 different phases. And there's a great article here that you can click on Mind Tools around the TUCHMAN model. And the other thing that's important to know or note is that even high-performing teams, if you have a leader leave or you have somebody that leaves the team, you go right back to the forming stage and have to work through the storming, the norming, and performing. So it's a continuous loop that happens. It's not sort of constant. Just because you were a performing team at one point, if something changes, it can put you back into the forming and storming. More likely, if you've been a high-performing team, you'll get out of the storming pretty quickly into norming and then performing. So teams in that norming stage that we talked about, the vision is sort of communicated for the business. They've turned into tangible goals. Most of the team members understand and they're looking for input. So it's sort of a guided process. Listen in making sure that they're working together. I've seen, a lot of it is communication, whether they have sort of frequent check-ins or that the team is, regularly in contact to make sure that the deliverables are met. I think an important part to getting to the norming stage is incentivizing team members, and it doesn't always equate to money. It can equate to feedback. It can equate to just sort of calling somebody out that's done a good job. There's certain things that can really build team cohesiveness when you're using in that norming stage, but use it in a meaningful way. It can't be sort of scripted, because that doesn't seem genuine. It's got to be very authentic. So it's important in that norming stage that the communication, the vision is very clear, and everybody understands what the vision is and what their part of that team role is, and that there's continuous feedback for better performance. And then in the performance stage, which again is a high achieving team, you really have, teams that really have a balance of the results and the relationship pieces of the 10 profiles that I mentioned. Everybody really understands their role and how they perform on the team. It's pretty remarkable to see that. Everybody feels that they're a part and they're working towards the same goal, rowing in the same direction. It's quite remarkable to see. And it allows people that, might not have seen themselves as leaders, because it doesn't matter whether it is the leader, but somebody on the team, that they develop their leadership skills, really understanding how they can be a better team member. They can represent a host of skills, and I've seen it in many teams where you can have, out of the 10 profiles, everybody sort of has mutual respect, trust for everybody, and you've built a culture that's behaviorally smart. That's really important. And that note there at the third bullet around protecting your culture is really around, if you have a high-performing team, and to keep that, it's really around the cultural values that you've set as a team. And I've actually been asked this question in an organization, because we work with many large organizations. Can you have a high-achieving team even if the rest of the company isn't? And I say absolutely yes. It really does start with the leader and the commitment to making sure that they break down barriers, break down sort of obstacles or blockages that could prevent that team from being a high-performance team. It does fall on the leader to be able to sort of emulate that behavior. And this is an example of what we call that natural behavior. So now we're shifting a little bit from the TUCHMAN model to what we do in understanding how to drive performance. It's really understanding the key talents of the team. And this is just an example of one individual. I mentioned Tripp and I are both initiators, but this is a case study that we often use of Chris Coddington. He's somebody that is very focused on sort of results. He's very fast-paced and planned. And this is his performance keys. Every single person that completes natural behavior has this. And we always focus on these because you can truly unlock performance if you know these 5 points to cover for an individual. And for Chris Coddington, because he is a strategist, you know, he likes the big picture. If you give him too much detail, he can get bored and might actually check out. It's important for always keeping the big picture. He likes an action plan. If he asks for information, he's got to be, you know, he wants something done, you know, fairly quickly. Keeping informed of the progress. He likes to be very logical and very results focused, so that key points are important. And then he does need information. So if he's asking for something, providing it, you don't have to give him a lot of information, but just keep it bulleted. And then if he's not happy, you know, or needs more information, he'll ask for it. But it can be remarkable in the team to use these environment keys for any team member. And that is the basis of what we do when we do a team culture review or a team awareness session, is teaching each of the profile types. And in the unlocking guide that I referred to earlier, it does indicate some of these things that a strategist would need. So you can, if you did download that particular PDF, you could see that what the strategist need would be. And then identifying the team differences, you know, building that productive team really does, and I referenced it on the trust, but all of these things here really do build trust and then team success. You can't really sort of bypass or short circuit any of these. It really is around understanding, acceptance, respect, builds commitment. It's about communication. You want different talents on the team, and if they're aligned, you really do lead to team success. And we use a tool called a Business DNA Team Report, which I've done a lot of consulting in my career. And one of the things that's very unique about this team report that's different than others that I've seen, it takes the whole team collectively, brings in a calculated sort of behavioral insight report that'll show the differences of the teams in their talents, how they make decisions, the culture of the team, their blind spots, identifies the strengths and struggles, and then really uses it to summarize to how best to work with that team. It's pretty remarkable to be able to use this as a tool in a team, sort of with a team in building, you know, that high-performing team. And we have a poll question that's going to show up on the screen.
All right, everyone, just get a quick pulse check here on where we are as far as identifying the stages of team development that we just reviewed. So which of the following are stages of team development? We're looking at the 4 listed there, and we'll see how everyone has kept up so far. And we'll just get a quick cross-section. And that should be good. We're all hitting on the same.
Excellent.
Perfect.
100%. So correct that. It starts with the forming, the storming, the norming, and the performing. So I know we have it mixed up a little bit, but that's by design.
Nicely done, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And then one of the things, as far as when we talked about the 10 different profiles, again, 5 of those that are very results focused, 5 are very relational. This gives you what we call on the bell curve. It's sort of a diagram of how each one of these 10 profile types, sort of how their lines would show up. And I'm just going to use 2 of these because we've got them as case studies, being the adapter and then the strategist. The adapter is really unique in that if you have a team member that's what we call an adapter, you can see all of their lines on the graph show up right in the middle, like at 50% on the bell curve. So when it comes to being take charge or cooperative, they're right in the middle. They can almost sort of flex that ability to be take charge. They're really unique individuals. And I'm not too far from an adapter in my profile, but I do have a couple of factors that put me into the initiator category, which I'm over here. The second one is the strategist. We've talked about Chris Coddington, represented by somebody that's very take charge and a little more reserved. You know, that's sort of the characteristics of those profiles. And you can see here, based on the lines, you know, where in every person is going to be unique, but this is just sort of the standard benchmark that we use when you're working with individuals. In this unlocking guide that Tripp and the team put together, there is a handout. It's probably one of the best tools we do have, because you can literally get a snapshot of everybody on the team. So even if you don't go through and have a team report, if everybody just completed natural behavior and then you had sort of their information, just knowing that they're a strategist or an initiator or an adapter, you'd be able to really unlock some performance just by this quick guide. It's intended to be sort of a quick start document. In most teams, before we even come on site, if we have a consulting engagement with the team, many of the team members have already figured out what the other team members are. It's kind of a fun exercise to go through, but that's really what that unlocking guide is. It's sort of the first step in learning how to work with these different behaviors and really getting the maximum. What you're trying to do is obviously get the team in that performance stage. It's a good tool to be able to use even without consultants. You can literally use this and sort of start working with your team in a much better way of learning where their strengths are. And then there's another report set that we have. We call it the comparison report, and it's probably one of the tools that we use whenever there's a misunderstanding with an individual, possibly the leader or subordinate or two team members, and it shows the two team members together on this report. It's a great report. It shows, in this case, Chris Coddington, who we've talked about, is the strategist, very take charge. And if you think about the bell curve, if you're just overlaying this here, you know, 69 is pretty high because 50 is the medium. And then you've got another team member here, John, who's a little bit more cooperative. Well, that probably would create some issues because Chris is going to be so take charge. If John is actually the leader of this group, that could be a problem, you know, for Chris to take direction from somebody like John. And you can see that sometimes in organizations when one of the subordinates has a more take charge personality than the leader. That can create some issues. And we always look for where the biggest difference is. In this case, you know, Chris Coddington's very reserved and John is very outgoing. And then you see over down here, you know, we've got Chris who's almost off the charts on pioneering, and you've got John here that's right in the middle on content. That's a pretty big difference as well. And then the risk-taking is pretty big between how cautious John is and how risk-taking Chris is. If these two people were working together, you probably would have some team dynamics that would need to be worked out. Either they could do it themselves, or they would need potentially somebody on the team that really gets understanding how to get maximum performance from both of them, because they're probably both really good employees, but they're going to communicate very differently and probably have different perceptions of how they could work together. So it's quite fascinating when you roll up these reports and then see the differences. It's quite interesting to be able to work with that. And then collectively, if they're rolled up into a team report with the rest of the team, you can even see some greater insight to be able to work with the team. And then on that unlocking guide that I mentioned, this is sort of an example of a strategist profile. Again, every person is going to be uniquely wired, but what I find is that if I've worked with any strategist, if I use this unlocking guide, it can be quite helpful, because the things that you want to key in are helping them perform and helping them maximize their potential. If you focus on those two things on the unlocking guide, you can be on your way to having a norming or a performing team. because it really does help understand that Strategist is wired for results. They tend to be visionary. They like structure. They need information. And then also this relating to them can be pretty helpful. So all 10 profiles in that unlocking guide can really help you lead to performance. And this is an example of the adapter profile, and I mentioned earlier that they sort of have a line graph right down the center, like 50%. And I've actually interviewed several adapters, and it's always interesting because they always say they really are not a master at anything, but they're great at a lot of things because they just can be so adaptable in so many different roles. So it's important, that to help them maximize their potential is really to set clear goals and priorities. But there are some unique ways they probably really have a difficult time making choices. So they can do a lot of different things, and they're easily adaptable to almost any role in the company. It's quite interesting. If you know an adapter, it's great to talk to them, to understand. And one of the things, I think of all the 10 profiles, just understanding what really motivates them is going to be important. And there are tools in the business DNA tool set that kind of get at motivators, but I think just having good discussion and dialogue that people feel part of the team is really imperative. And the other thing that's very interesting about adapters, and this isn't to say that there aren't true adapters, because there are, but occasionally if somebody's really going through a life change event, let's say that it's pretty radical, like change, potentially a death of a spouse or a child. It's pretty traumatic. That can really unsettle somebody into that they're emotionally sort of distraught. And if they come out as an adapter, it could be that they are just in confusion when answering the 46 questions that might score as an adapter. And if that happens, I can usually look at the output and determine if they should take it again, maybe in 6 months when things have calmed down, or maybe they're just out of this emotional sort of period. But if it's somebody that actually does score 50 all the way through, then you can pretty much guarantee that they're an adapter. But it's the only exception we have when somebody scores an adapter that isn't on the true 50, at the 50% on the bell curve. And our advice is to have them take it again in 6 months to really get more accurate results. And
important to note that, typically we wouldn't have that scenario play out, that pretty much the one time you would take this assessment is the only time it would ever be needed. And that's where we stand, and that's where the validation and all the work that's gone into the history of building this platform is it's a one and done scenario, with this one outlier being the one situation that as rarely as it comes up, it's just worth noting.
Yeah, good information, because Trip is correct. It's a one time that you take natural behavior. I've taken mine 7 years ago, and it stays spot on. It's that natural, instinctive behavior. So I've got some learned behaviors that I've been able to modify, but that's very important. Thank you for
that's a different assessment altogether.
Yep, exactly. So now shifting gears a little bit on building the new team culture. Now that we've got all this great information on the 10 profiles, the natural behavior, the learned behavior, really around the keys around the forming, the storming, the norming, the performing. Building a leadership team really does take work, and we're big believers of that. Every team member that's on your team is there for a reason and a purpose. Sometimes they could be in stress. There's different things that happen on teams, but if you actually do use and utilize time to develop sort of the performance strengths and struggles of an individual, that they really know they're part of the team, assessing the roles, making sure they're in the right role, developing a leader model that, can be used for every team member, not just the leader, but everybody does sort of peer-to-peer coaching, I think is important. You really sort of tap into that emotional. People are not machines. They're really human beings. Doesn't matter how results focused somebody is. We all have sort of that relational side to us. And then number 4 is really helping the team manage their biases, to be really understanding how to be a better behavioral coach. Now, that can be different degrees for different people, but, I think it's important that everybody feels self-respect around how they work together, providing feedback, providing coaching, every step along the way really develops that team cohesiveness and builds a better culture. And some ways to do that, in this team report that we've talked about, is understanding everybody's unique decision-making style. And in everybody's individual business DNA report, it shows how likely they are to make a decision. And that doesn't mean that they're afraid to make decisions. It just means how much information they need to make a decision, how much they like to build relationships, how confronting they can be, how innovative they can be, and then actually making independent decisions. These are all really good sort of scores to understand for an individual. And we get asked this a lot. What does the 8% mean here on independently makes decisions? That is, in the total universe of natural behavior, the percentage to the population that person makes independent decision making. So you can see it's pretty low. So somebody that would score in the 90s, like Chris Coddington, if you saw his report, his would be in the 90s. He's very comfortable to make independent decisions. It gets back to how self-reliant is he, or how cooperative or consensus-seeking is somebody. That's what it points to. And every person will be unique. Every score is going to be different. But it gives you the understanding of how people like to make decisions. And then on that team report that I mentioned, probably one of the great assets that we do have, really understanding how to review and navigate those team differences. It's quite interesting. In the 8 categories that we use, factors, you can see how cooperative or how take charge an individual is, and then the distribution of the team. It's quite interesting to see that. And that collectively shows the leader how to be able to work with the strengths and the struggles that the team has, how to actually use them for success, and are people in the right roles. So many times when we do a roll-up of a team, and they roll up as maybe an adapter team, that shows that they have the power to be a very successful team. They have the aptitude or the behavioral insights to be a high-performing team. Doesn't mean that they are, because there's a certain amount of emotional intelligence that has to be used. But if a team rolls up as an initiator team or a community builder team, it shows that they have the power of that team that's more results focused or more relational. It's quite interesting to be able to roll up a team and see where they would roll up. And it's not always the same. And then for this productivity gain that we've talked about, this 70%, if you actually use sort of building the culture of team performance, individuals' productivity can really increase by 40% because they know the task, they know what needs to get done, what their role is in the team. You have a high percentage of team productivity. Well, that is going to lead to much higher sort of referral rates, revenue from the customer, because they actually feel like you care about them, that they're part of the business. You built a customer success model that really does think about the customer first. And this can be a very proven methodology with any team that you're doing. Some indicators of employee engagement are, reliability obviously is very important. They feel understood by their manager, that number 2 bullet. They want to stay with that manager. They really enjoy working with them. Follow the company plan. They ask questions when they need help. They really feel part of this inclusive team. And there's a great book in our first presentation called First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham. It's a great read and really reinforces why, these 5 points, why it's important that everybody feels valued to the team. And then occasionally you may have a team member that just isn't gelling with the team and they really need to think about maybe a different role or maybe leaving the team. And that's okay. I'm a big proponent of self-selection. If people are not part of the team, it's not running them off. It's just pointing out that they're just not the right role for that team. And there's certain things you can do to build sort of a culture where people feel part of the team, but they may leave and go work somewhere else just because it's, they really felt like it just wasn't the right role for them. but that it's always constantly pruning, because to get to that 70%, again, if you have another team member come in, you will always start out at the forming of a team, but you want to get to team productivity or team performance. And then one of the things that we do quite a bit, because we do a lot of research here at DNA Behavior, we've got some great blog articles that we continue to post, some great case studies that we emphasize around team performance, team productivity. Our focus really is to identify that natural and instinctive behavior talents. It's going to remain stable over time, as Tripp mentioned. But you really have sort of this whole tool set to be able to understand how best to onboard another team member or a new team member, or how to work with an existing team member, because we're all really wired differently. And then figuring out that reliable predictor of, is this person really in the right role, making sure that you are leveraging every individual on the team, because it's not always about adding more team members to the work. It's really understanding what each person's role is and how it collectively works the rest of the team. With that, I think we have another poll question that's going to show up.
All right, everyone, as we approach the end of our time here together today, and appreciate you donating that for us, just like to get a check-in on what other topics might be interested in learning more about. Certainly, we're approaching the end of, we're part 3 of 4 of team performance, but looking for other interests out there amongst our followers. And so we'll get a quick cross-section there and close them up. Might as well share. It's, it's always nice to see, okay, well, evenly split between corporate culture and leadership development, which is good. We've done leadership development. Corporate culture is high on our priority list, and we're also working with some of our consultant partners on revealing a bit more of our certification, and that'll probably be more what we get into next month. But we'll close that up and begin wrapping things up.
All right, very good. And the cultural piece, I think, is really important. Tripp and the group published a great blog on the Uber model about a month ago. I think it's a good one to look at, really around things that they might have been able to do, and they're actually doing some things right now to write the company. It's a very valuable company, and it's some things that really just went off the rails that didn't get attended to. So that's why it's important to know the makeup and the culture of your team. And with that, just a little history on the company. We've been around since 2001. We consider ourselves an HR tech platform, using in the workflow, being able to use these powerful insights to be able to manage and work and select better team members that actually understand the work and be able to deliver the work. It's pretty cool to be able to work in that type of integrated work. We're highly validated we've been since 2001. The Georgia Tech here in Atlanta and their research team helped with our validation. We measure 64 behavioral factors in that forced choice model. We're in 123 countries with 11 different languages. And we've got clients actually around the world that use this Business DNA program. And then on September 19th, we have this new webinar series. It's called Becoming a Business DNA Performance Advisor. It's really going to tap into a little bit deeper around the consultant model around using Business DNA. It's going to be quite interesting to be able to use that. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, so hopefully you can join us on Tuesday, September 19th at 1 o'clock. And then finally, the Behaviorally Smart series that we run, it's on a podcast channel, and there's a number of them around team performance and leadership development. So if you click on that link there, it'll actually take you to all of the Behaviorally Smart podcasts that are out there. And I did mention, if you would like to take the Business DNA profile, please, oops, sorry about that. It's at the very end, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to have to scroll through here. There is a link here that will take you to the assessment. It takes a quick second to just register your first name, last name, and email address. And then, can't seem to get it here. Sorry about that. I'm having a little challenge here. Here it is. That's called the businessdna.com discovery link right there underneath my email address. You can click on that, and that'll actually take you to the assessment, and you can complete that. And if you use that unlocking guide that was included in the handout, you can sort of do that self-discovery yourself. But if you have any questions, please direct them to me or to Tripp, and we'll be happy to answer those. We really enjoy doing the work on teaching companies to be behaviorally smart. It's something that I have a lot of passion for, and would love to see you on a future webinar. And with that, I think we'll give you back maybe a couple minutes of your day. I think we're running right up on our time. And if there are no other questions, I think we're completed.
That just covered the fact that it's for natural behavior, it really is intended as a once-only opportunity that we really capture the core of what one's behavior is under pressure. And that's the main point there, versus maybe the learned behavior that comes from your environment, education, social economic status, whatnot. So there's some other factors in there. We really only bring them into play depending on what the gap in the relationship is, whether it's a leader and an employee or two employees. When you start getting opposite sides of the table, it helps bringing folks together a bit more easily with the additional tools. But the core is what we focus on here, and that's what we've covered today. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all, and have a great day.